It all started like any other day, a quiet afternoon, the sound of birds chirping, and the warmth of the sun. But in a moment, everything changed. One woman, one act of cruelty, and my world was shattered. Karen, a woman I trusted to be a neighbor, a person who should have been a part of our community, stabbed my disabled daughter in the back. Literally, how could someone, anyone, ever do such a thing? But this wasn't the end of the story, no. It was just the beginning. As the blood poured and the panic set in, my daughter did something that none of us expected. She escaped. But how? You won't believe what happened next. This is the kind of story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about people. Hold on tight, because this is not just another story of betrayal. It's a fight for survival, a twist of fate, and a strength you can't even imagine. Stick around to hear the full truth of how she survived against all odds. It was an ordinary day, one that seemed like all the others. My daughter, despite her disability, was always full of life. She had this remarkable spirit about her, a fighter in every sense. From the moment she woke up, she faced challenges that most of us couldn't even begin to imagine. Yet she carried herself with grace and determination. Her disability wasn't something that defined her, it was just a part of who she was. And despite the difficulties, she never let it stop her from pursuing the things she loved. On this particular day, she was enjoying a quiet afternoon in the yard, just taking in the calm and beauty of nature. There was no sign of the chaos that would soon follow. But then there was Karen. Karen was a neighbor, a person we thought we could trust. We had always believed she was just another face in the neighborhood, someone we could wave at on our walks and perhaps share a few words with here and there. But as we would later learn, Karen harbored a deep resentment, one we couldn't even begin to understand. It was small things at first, remarks about how my daughter was too loud or too much of a distraction, but we brushed them off, thinking it was just a passing annoyance. Little did we know that these small comments were only the beginning of something much darker. It wasn't long before Karen's attitude shifted from passive to hostile. She started showing up uninvited, making her presence known in the most intrusive ways. What was supposed to be a peaceful afternoon would soon turn into a nightmare, and we had no idea how drastically everything was about to change. The smile on my daughter's face as she enjoyed the warmth of the sun was going to fade, replaced with something much darker, something that would test her strength in ways we never imagined. As the days went by, the tension between Karen and my daughter only grew. At first, it was subtle, a passing comment here, a disapproving glance there. But it soon became clear that Karen harbored a deep resentment toward my daughter, something much more intense than we had anticipated. My daughter's laughter, her simple joy, seemed to irk Karen in a way we couldn't understand. Each time my daughter celebrated a small victory, whether it was taking a few more steps or learning something new, Karen would find a way to undermine it. It was as though every triumph my daughter achieved felt like a personal affront to her. I noticed Karen's actions becoming more intrusive. She started showing up uninvited, always finding a way to be near my daughter, never really offering help or support, but instead casting judgment. At first, it was the little things, making snide comments about how she thought we should deal with my daughter's disability or how it was too much for her to handle. But over time, her behavior took a darker turn. I began to hear whispers from neighbors, things that hinted at Karen's true nature, how she'd belittle others behind their backs, or how she'd often speak about her hatred for those who seemed to seek attention in any way. It was clear that she had a toxic mindset, one that seemed to grow stronger every time she saw my daughter. What made it even worse was that Karen's cruelty was so insidious. She didn't openly lash out. No, she was far more manipulative than that. She would find ways to make my daughter feel uncomfortable without ever crossing the line in a way that could be directly confronted. There were the subtle comments about how my daughter wasn't like everyone else, or the dismissive gestures when my daughter tried to talk to her. These things weren't immediately alarming on their own, but when combined, they formed a pattern that felt suffocating, like a slow-moving storm on the horizon that you knew was coming but couldn't quite pinpoint when. I could see the toll it was taking on my daughter. She began withdrawing more, avoiding places where she might run into Karen. The vibrant energy she once had started to fade, replaced by an unease that lingered in the air whenever Karen was near. It was heartbreaking to watch. My daughter, always so resilient, was losing a piece of herself to this woman who had no business being in her life. The worst part? Karen didn't seem to care. She didn't see her actions as cruel. She saw them as justified, as if somehow my daughter's presence in this world was an affront to her own existence. The day it all changed came without warning, but the tension had been building for so long that, looking back, it felt inevitable. Karen's presence in our lives had gone from uncomfortable to unbearable, and we were all on edge, waiting for the moment when things would finally erupt. I remember vividly how my daughter was sitting in the backyard that day, enjoying a moment of peace, when Karen showed up once again. The air felt thick, as though the world itself knew that something was about to snap. My heart pounded in my chest, a warning I couldn't ignore. And then it happened. Karen crossed a line she could never come back from. I could see it in her eyes, the hatred, the spite. She had been pushing and pushing, and now she was ready to act. Whatever had been building inside of her, whatever resentment and anger she'd been holding on to, was about to spill over, and we were all about to witness the consequences. I felt it in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't just another confrontation. This was something far darker. The day the world changed started like any other, with no warning of the horror that would unfold. My daughter, as usual, was sitting in the backyard, her favorite spot to enjoy the quiet of the afternoon. The air was warm, the sun gently glimmering through the trees, and the sound of birds chirping in the distance. I could hear her humming softly to herself, lost in the peaceful world she'd created in that small corner of our yard. But the peace, the calm we had all come to take for granted, was about to shatter into pieces. Karen had been lurking around more than usual. She'd shown up uninvited for the past few days, her presence growing more and more oppressive. On this particular day, though, something felt different. It wasn't the usual passive-aggressive comments or the sly insults disguised as concern. No, today she was on a mission, and I could sense it in the way she walked, her eyes fixed, determined, like a predator that had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. At first, I didn't think much of it. Karen was standing by the gate, watching my daughter, as she often did, but there was something unsettling in the air, an ominous feeling that clung to the atmosphere, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I went inside for a moment to grab a drink, and in those few seconds, everything changed. The next thing I heard was a loud, gut-wrenching scream. It wasn't my daughter's usual playful sound or the kind of noise that came from a normal afternoon in the yard. This scream was filled with terror, pain, and desperation, and it tore through the air like a jagged knife. My heart froze, and before I even thought, I ran outside, my legs shaking with fear. When I reached the backyard, my eyes immediately found my daughter, trembling and backing away from Karen, who stood there, her hands shaking but her expression cold, almost satisfied. I couldn't understand what was happening. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. Karen had a look on her face I'd never seen before, an expression that was both chilling and angry, like she had been waiting for this moment to happen, and now that it had, she was in control. "Karen, what the hell is going on?" I shouted, my voice laced with panic. Karen didn't answer right away. She was standing there, looking at me with a strange, almost sickening calmness. Then, with the most casual, cold tone, she spoke, "You need to get her under control. She's a distraction, a problem, and she's been a nuisance for far too long." I didn't understand. What was she talking about? My daughter, a disabled child, had never once harmed anyone. She was innocent, harmless. But Karen's words were laced with venom. Her eyes, full of disdain, bore into me, and I could see the hatred radiating from her. It wasn't just about my daughter's disability, it was something deeper, something twisted. "Leave her alone." I shouted, stepping forward, trying to shield my daughter from Karen's icy gaze. But just as I moved, I saw it. Karen's hand moved quickly toward my daughter's back. The glint of something metallic, caught my eye in the sunlight, and before I could react, I realized what was happening. Karen had a knife. In that instant, time seemed to stop. I couldn't process what I was seeing. Karen, the woman who had once been just a neighbor, was holding a knife, and she was about to stab my daughter. My body moved on instinct, screaming, reaching out, but it was too late. The blade pierced my daughter's skin. A sickening, sharp cry escaped her lips, and I saw the blood fresh and warm, staining her shirt, her skin, her soul. I froze, my mind racing, trying to comprehend the reality of what had just happened. How could someone do this? How could someone hurt an innocent person so cruelly? But there was no time to think. My daughter's face, pale with shock and pain, looked up at me, her wide eyes full of confusion and fear. The world around me felt like it was spinning, like the earth had just tilted off its axis. I rushed to her, grabbing her in my arms, trying to shield her from further harm. Karen stood there, not moving, watching as if she had just completed some twisted task. There was no regret in her eyes, no remorse. It was as if she had gotten what she wanted, a sick satisfaction that I couldn't even begin to understand. Why? I screamed at Karen, my voice breaking. Why would you do this? She didn't answer. There was nothing more to say. Her silence spoke volumes. As I cradled my daughter, her fragile body trembling in my arms, the realization hit me, this wasn't just a random act of cruelty. This was calculated, deliberate. Karen had been building up to this moment, feeding off her anger, her jealousy, her hatred for something she couldn't control. And in a split second, she had crossed the line, shattering the peace of our lives in one brutal act. My daughter, despite the pain, despite the terror that had gripped her, managed to look at me and whisper, "I'm okay. I'll be okay." But those words didn't bring comfort. They only made the reality of what had just happened hit harder. My daughter had been stabbed by someone we trusted, someone who had been a neighbor, a part of our community, and now she was the one who had betrayed us. In that moment, I made a promise to my daughter, a promise that no matter what happened next, we would survive this. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of a much darker story. I held my daughter in my arms, my mind racing, my heart thumping so loudly in my chest that I thought it might explode. The pain on her face was unbearable, but it was the look in her eyes that haunted me most. There was a fear there, yes, but beneath it a fire, a spark that wouldn't let her go down without a fight. She wasn't going to let this be the end of her story. She couldn't. "Stay with me, sweetheart," I whispered urgently, trying to apply pressure to her wound, hoping against hope that it would slow the bleeding. The seconds felt like hours, and every minute we wasted in that moment seemed to increase the chances that Karen would find a way to stop us. Karen stood there, still as a statue, watching us like she had no fear of being stopped, as if this was all part of her plan. I couldn't let her get away with this. I couldn't let my daughter, my beautiful, strong daughter, be a victim of someone so sick. But at that moment, it felt like the world had turned its back on us. I was frozen, unsure of what to do next, paralyzed by the terror and the adrenaline coursing through my veins. My daughter's breathing was shallow. Labored, she needed help and fast. But then, something incredible happened. My daughter, despite everything, despite the pain and the fear, started to move. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, she shifted in my arms, trying to stand. I didn't understand. How could she even think about moving after everything she had just gone through? How could she have the strength left to fight? "Sweetheart, no, we need to stay here," I pleaded, but she shook her head, her face twisted with both pain and determination. Her hand reached for the ground, her fingers trembling. But there was purpose in her movements. She wasn't just trying to get away from Karen. She was trying to survive, to escape the nightmare she was in. "Mom, we need to go," she whispered, her voice hoarse, but there was no mistaking the resolve in it. I can't let her win." A surge of pride hit me, mingled with pure fear. My daughter was a fighter, but could she really escape? Was this possible? Every instinct screamed at me to keep her still, to make sure we didn't make a mistake that could make things worse. But as I looked into her eyes, I knew that she wasn't just trying to escape Karen, she was fighting for her own dignity, her own life. She was fighting for the strength she knew she had, the strength I knew she had all along. With a deep breath, I helped her onto her feet, but the moment she stood, the pain in her face intensified. She stumbled, nearly collapsing again, but she caught herself on the fence. The determination in her eyes was a stark contrast to the agony she was enduring, but somehow she kept pushing forward. I stayed right behind her, ready to catch her if she fell, but she never did. She kept going. We weren't far from the gate, but every step felt like we were a million miles away from safety. My mind was racing, weighing the odds. Could Karen really stop us? Could she harm my daughter further? I kept thinking of all the ways this could go wrong, too many thoughts flooding my mind, but I had to focus on the one thing that mattered, getting my daughter to safety. Come on, honey, I whispered, trying to stay calm, trying to reassure her. We're almost there. But as we reached the gate, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind us. I turned, and there she was, Karen. Her eyes were cold, her hands trembling, but there was something else there, too. Something darker, a sense of victory. She was enjoying this, enjoying the control she had over us. And she wasn't going to let us escape easily. You think you're going to get away from me? Karen's voice was low, barely more than a growl, but the venom in it was unmistakable. Not so fast. My heart skipped a beat and my blood ran cold. I had to act fast. My daughter couldn't keep going much longer. Every movement was costing her. Every step was a battle, but she refused to give up. The intensity of the situation hit me in waves. Karen was gaining on us, and I was terrified, terrified that we wouldn't make it, terrified that my daughter would collapse in the middle of all this. Don't stop, sweetheart. I urged her, forcing my legs to move faster, pushing the gate open. My daughter didn't need to be told twice. She took a step forward, then another, her body shaking with the effort, but she kept moving. Karen lunged toward us, but as her hand reached out to grab my daughter, something amazing happened. My daughter, in one swift motion, turned toward Karen with a strength that surprised even me. She didn't fight back, physically. She couldn't, but she managed to swing her body out of Karen's reach. The shock on Karen's face was instantaneous, but before she could react, my daughter pulled herself free from her grasp. It was the moment I had been waiting for. The first step toward freedom. I grabbed my daughter's arm and yanked her forward, away from Karen. My pulse was racing, and I felt a rush of adrenaline like nothing I had ever felt before. The gate was open now, and there was no turning back. We were going to make it. We ran. We ran with everything we had. The world around us seemed to blur as we pushed through the gate and down the street, but my daughter never slowed. I kept glancing back, half expecting Karen to be right behind us, but each time I looked, there was nothing. The further we got, the safer we felt, but I didn't stop running until we reached the nearest neighbor's house, where we finally collapsed together. My daughter was breathing hard, but she was smiling. She had done it. She had escaped. I held her close, my heart still pounding, my chest heaving as if I had been running too. But in that moment, I knew that this wasn't just a physical escape. It was a victory of spirit. My daughter had faced the unimaginable, and she had won. Not because of her physical strength, but because of the strength that lived inside her, the strength of someone who refused to be broken. We had made it, and against all odds, we had escaped. We had finally made it to safety, but even as we caught our breath, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The adrenaline that had fueled us through the escape was wearing off, replaced by a sense of unease that I couldn't quite explain. My daughter, though exhausted, seemed to be in shock, her eyes distant, as if she was still processing what had just happened. I pulled her closer, wrapping my arms around her, trying to calm the storm of thoughts that raced through my mind. We were safe for now, but the nightmare wasn't over, not by a long shot. The silence between us was thick, filled with the weight of everything we had just survived. I couldn't help but wonder why Karen had done this. What had driven her to such an extreme, to attack an innocent child in cold blood? My mind was spinning and I needed answers. But as I sat there holding my daughter, I realized that the truth was still out there, waiting to be revealed. It wasn't until later that evening, after we had contacted the police, that the full extent of what had happened began to unravel. The officers taking our statements seemed stunned by the violence of the attack, but they were also puzzled. They had never heard of anything like this happening in our neighborhood. Karen had always been a fixture in the community, known for her strong opinions and her tendency to speak out, but no one ever imagined her capable of something like this. But the real twist came when the officers began to dig into Karen's background. The neighbors, hesitant to speak up before, started sharing their own stories, stories I never could have imagined. Karen hadn't just been a difficult neighbor, she had been hiding something darker, something much more sinister. It wasn't just that she disliked my daughter, it was something deeper, something that had been festering for years. Karen's obsession with control had begun long before we ever moved into the neighborhood. According to the officers, she had a history of targeting families who she believed were too different or too loud. She had been involved in multiple incidents where her sense of superiority had led her to bully others, to isolate them, and to make their lives a living hell. But none of this had come to light until now. No one had ever connected the dots, not until they started looking at her actions through a different lens. What truly sent a chill down my spine, however, was what the officers uncovered about Karen's own past. It seemed that her hatred for people like my daughter, people who were different, was not just a personal vendetta. It was a manifestation of something much darker. Karen's own family had been abusive, and she had been raised in an environment where her worth had always been measured by her ability to control and dominate others. There were rumors, but no one had known for sure until now. She had been using her position in the community to manipulate people, to control them with her words and actions. And when she saw my daughter, someone so pure and innocent, living her life with joy despite her disability, it sparked something inside her, a rage she could no longer contain. The most disturbing part of all of this was that Karen's attack wasn't just a random act of violence. It wasn't just about her anger toward my daughter. It was about her need for control, her need to break us, to prove that she was the one who called the shots. She had been waiting for the right moment to strike, to make sure we understood just how much power she truly had over our lives. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. All along, I had been thinking that Karen's actions were simply the result of an unprovoked attack, an act of cruelty out of nowhere. But this was something much more calculated. She had been plotting this for a long time, biding her time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to make her move. And when my daughter stood up to her, when she dared to be happy and to live her life, Karen couldn't stand it anymore. She had to tear that happiness down, even if it meant hurting an innocent child. As the truth came to light, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. How could someone so seemingly normal, so embedded in the fabric of our community, be capable of such horror? But I knew one thing for sure: the fight wasn't over. The battle for my daughter's safety, for our peace of mind, was far from won. We had escaped, yes, but the truth was just beginning to surface, and I was ready to fight back with everything I had. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I had learned one thing for certain that day. My daughter was stronger than I had ever realized. We were going to stand together, and no matter what Karen had planned next, we would be ready. The days following the attack were a blur of police reports, doctor's visits, and sleepless nights. But amidst all the chaos, one thing became clear: we weren't going to let Karen win. The support from our community, those who had once been silent, began to pour in. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak out before now came forward, telling the police about Karen's history of bullying and manipulation. It turned out she wasn't just a threat to us, she had terrorized others in the past, but no one had ever stood up to her the way we were. The authorities quickly took action. Karen was arrested and charged, and it became evident that she had crossed a line that she could never uncross. The legal process was long and grueling, but seeing her face the consequences of her actions was a small measure of justice. Karen tried to play the victim in court, claiming she was misunderstood and provoked, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her actions were clear, and the truth of her malicious intent came to light. As the case moved forward, I realized that the justice we were seeking wasn't about vengeance, it was about making sure no one else would have to suffer the way we had. But the real victory, the one that mattered the most, was the way my daughter handled it all. Despite the trauma she had endured, she grew stronger with each passing day. The wound on her back healed, but the emotional scars, the fear, took longer to fade. There were moments of darkness, moments when she doubted herself, when she felt like the world was a much scarier place than she had ever realized. But she didn't let that define her. Slowly, she regained her confidence, and as she began to speak out about what had happened, her voice became a beacon for others who had suffered in silence. We learned a valuable lesson through it all. Resilience isn't just about surviving, it's about coming out the other side stronger and more determined than before. We may never get full justice, but what we did get was our peace back. And with that, we emerged stronger than before, more united, more determined, and more aware of the power of standing up for what's right. The nightmare was over, but the journey of healing and growth had just begun. And together, we would face whatever came next, knowing that we could survive anything. As I sit here reflecting on everything we've been through, I can't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. What happened to us was unimaginable, a nightmare that no one should ever have to experience. But through it all, we learned something invaluable. The strength within us is more powerful than anything else. My daughter didn't just survive that day. She fought back with every ounce of her being. She stood up for herself, for her right to live without fear, and for every person who's ever felt small or powerless. This story is more than just about a single attack or a single victim. It's about resilience, the courage to face the unimaginable, and the unbreakable bond that exists between a mother and her child. No matter what happens in life, we all have the power to rise, to push through, and to come out the other side stronger than we were before. If this story touched you, if it inspired you, or if you believe in the power of standing up for what's right, I encourage you to take action. Don't stay silent when you see injustice. Don't turn away from someone who needs help. And most importantly, remember that you are stronger than you think. Thank you so much for watching and for supporting our journey. If you want to hear more stories of strength, resilience, and survival, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the HOA Stories. Your support means everything to us. Together, we can continue to share these stories and help each other face the challenges ahead. Let's keep standing up together.